Damien, great to see you again. Our last discussion was extremely popular, so I'm really looking forward to this one.
Great, thank you. Yeah, no, me too. Very much excited.
Brilliant. So could you just remind people about your background, please?
Yes, I've got one skill, which is I'm quite good at coming up with ideas, and I've just managed to find ways to make that work in multiple industries, primarily in marketing and branding. So what that means is I started in psychology, moved into advertising, then I moved into brand consultancy, and now I'm the co-founder of a startup. But the common thread is thinking of ways of doing things that people aren't currently doing, and then being able to apply that into a business context.
Perfect. And that's, certainly the little time that I've known you, that's absolutely stood out very large in terms of bringing different thinking to commercial problems, which gets us into kind of like today's session, which is we're going to talk about the key lessons you've learned about turning highly creative book authors into global commercial success stories, and how does it apply to business. So let's kind of kick off with the first question. Could you tell us a bit about how you crossed the chasm from strategy director at Travel Diaries to brand development director at Hachette Book Group? What was your USP?
Well, the actual start point was I was at my ad agency, and we were approached by Penguin Books, who at the time was struggling as a brand. Which is kind of hard to think of nowadays. It wasn't that long ago.
Absolutely.
This is in the kind of late 90s, but they were being seen as kind of old-fashioned, slightly out of touch, and they wanted a brand campaign to kind of re-establish themselves within the book industry and in consumers' minds. So I worked on that, and I think the USP, if you can call it a USP, the way I managed to make the bridge, because I subsequently did a lot of work with different publishers, different authors, is that the book industry has absolutely no money. Now, I know that every single marketing person in the world says, oh, I just don't have enough budget. You know, even British Telecom and Amazon say, I haven't got enough budget. And nobody has enough money in any walk of life to do everything that they want to do. But when they say I haven't got any budget, they mean, you know, we've only got a few million in our marketing budget. When you talk to a book publisher, they literally have no budget, you know. So most of the ways in which you market a book come down to working with the tools that you already have. So literally the book cover, the title, the way you list it in Amazon, the way you get the bookshops excited about it, the way the author talks about it, the author photo, the blurb on the back. So it's about working with materials that have been used, you know, hundreds of thousands of times a year for decades. How do you stand out? So it really is about trying to be inventive within very, very fixed parameters. And I think that was probably my where I brought some advantage.
So just out of interest, so why does the book industry in particular have very, very small marketing budgets? What's happened to the kind of industry?
So honestly, it's a fascinating industry. So the way it works is, I mean, people often say, well, you publish a lot of books. So each year, tens of thousands of new books are published. In your lifetime, you know, if you project forward towards the rest of your life and sadly to your demise, you're going to read, let's say you read 5 books a year, 6 books a year, and that would make you a pretty heavy reader, which in itself is depressing. When you think that half the population, literally half the population, never buy a book, not even as a gift. They just don't buy books. So you're already in a niche. And then if you say, okay, actually read and read for pleasure and read more than 4 or 5 books, you're in a really small group of people. So, but let's say you're only talking about, I don't know, 100, 120 books left for you to read. Yeah. It's really depressing here. Same with me. But
I'm going to start to count them off one by one.
Exactly. But you kind of should. You kind of should. And why waste time on crap? Because
exactly right.
There are only so many books you can read, and there are literally tens of thousands published every year. So it is an industry that, on the consumer side, the problem is it's kind of bifurcated between what's the latest. Everyone's obsessed with what's out now. What's the book of the summer? What's the book of the year? What's the book of the month? You know, so there's a huge demand from the consumer to get the latest.
Yep.
And you've also got people who want to read the classics, those standout books that you kind of feel you have to read, you have to get round to. So the market goes like that, but in the middle is just all the stuff that gets missed. So the way the industry works is thousands of books are published. Each year, a few make money. I mean, a handful make money. It might be 5 or 10% make money. The rest lose money. So
I've heard this.
This is like the worst record companies of yesteryear who just chuck artists at the market and hope something sticks. And you just need one. You just need one for everything else to be paid for. You know, when Penguin hit upon Jamie Oliver single-handedly pretty much defined their profits for the year. You know, one author can do it. So it's a numbers game in many respects.
Yeah.
So when you are because you don't know what the market's going to go for.
No.
The lag between finding an author, designing the covers, editing it through, getting it into the sales process, getting it onto the market is around a year.
Wow.
So there's such a delay, such a lag, that you've no idea where the world's going to be going or what's going to happen or what people want to read. So there's a lot of guesswork. Now, obviously, every publishing company says, no, it's art and science. And of course, there's a lot of science to this and there's a lot of experience. And yes, there is. But if there was more science in the process, more publishers would be producing more bestsellers. And, you know, the common refrain is, why don't you just publish bestsellers? Because we don't know what's going to be a bestseller, you know?
That's right.
So,
and just out of interest, is there an industry kind of like average about, for a published book via a publishing company, how many copies does a fiction book sell on average? Given you've got that massive spread of a few real successes and most of them don't, are the volumes quite low?
Yes, they are. I mean, I should know this, and I daren't give you a number because somebody's going to get onto LinkedIn and say,
"Yeah, exactly. It's all wrong."
But the numbers are. But I know that, like hardback non-fiction, you can be selling sometimes at certain times of the year just a few hundred copies a week, and you'll be at number one. Yeah, it's not. We're not talking about hundreds of thousands here, and in fiction, it's in the thousands. It's not extraordinary numbers to get a number one one book. So it's incredibly hard for publishers to put lots of marketing spend behind books because they just don't know where to put the money. So very often what you're doing is you're holding back for the bankers, the ones that you know because it's a big author or a big series, and then there's a little pot left that's spread out amongst hundreds of other authors who all need to be loved and cared for, because they might break out, or one day they might be big, you know. So it's a real balancing act, and that's why I find it a fascinating industry because the people in it are amazingly creative and super intelligent, articulate, everything you would imagine from an author or a publisher or an agent, indeed. But it is handicapped by this almost impossible business model where you don't know what's going to work and what isn't.
Fascinating. So let's move on to, because it ties into exactly that. So what's changed in the way that books, kind of fiction and non-fiction, have been successfully promoted in the last 10 years, and what's kind of cutting edge now? Given the backdrop you've just given, you know, what works, and what, given current technology, what is working more now than before?
Okay, this is where it gets really depressing. So, the hard thing to understand here is that a publisher finds an author, they craft and polish the book with the author, but then, of course, they have to get it out to the consumer, and that goes through the retail gatekeeper of either Amazon or an independent bookshop, usually, or maybe a chain, W. Smith's. At that point, the publisher effectively loses control. So Amazon know who's buying what books. They know what else you've bought. They know what the last book you bought was. If you're on a Kindle, they actually know what page you got to in the book before you gave it up and found something else. They know what other items you're buying. So their level of understanding of the audience and their appetite for that author or for that series or for that genre is extraordinary. Extraordinary. Even book retailers have a better sense. Your publisher is kind of one step removed. So it's incredibly hard for them to know how to get to the end reader, the end consumer.
Because they don't have the data.
They don't have the data and they don't have the contact points.
Yep.
You don't have the contact points. The retail gatekeepers have the contact points. So the authors that succeed are the ones that can circumvent the retailers. So a celebrity, a social influencer. Because if I'm a social influencer and I've just got a fantastic Instagram blog about how I clean my house and I've got 200,000 followers, that is instantly 200,000 followers that the publisher can reach directly to and talk to about a book. Any other author who might have written the most beautiful and perfect novel in the world, it's very hard to find the audience for that author. Very hard.
Absolutely.
Because all our reading tastes are different. So without that direct point of access to the audience, it's extraordinarily hard, and that's why you see increasingly publishers and bookshops gravitate towards the celebrities or the social media influencers because they know it's a banker.
Yeah.
And what that does is there's only so many slots on a bookshelf in a retail slot.
Yeah.
There's only so many books a publisher can work on. The downside of that is you're squeezing out extraordinary writers for the sake of chasing a celebrity.
So So I believe you worked with JK Rowling.
So I worked on.
So how did that work?
So Hachette was one of the companies I worked with, and they have one of their authors is JK Rowling, and she works through the Little Brown imprint, and they had an extraordinary situation where she'd done all the Harry Potters. She wanted to write under a different guise, because one of the problems of being a writer of her stature is that I think you get to the point where you think, is this about my writing anymore? Have I just created this monster that goes beyond me and it has its own momentum, and I just want to get back to writing for myself and to kind of test myself as a writer in a different way. Now, I'm putting words in her mouth, but this is my understanding. So she created a crime series, and she created a author pseudonym for that crime series, Robert Galbraith. The idea being that the writing would be judged on the basis of the writing, not on the fact that it was JK Rowling. So astonishingly brave of her and exciting. So nobody knew that Robert Galbraith, not even publishers and agents knew Robert Galbraith was actually JK Rowling. So she launched, did pretty well, and then there was a leak, and it got out that actually Robert Galbraith was JK Rowling, and the whole world went crazy because now it was everyone thought it was a publicity stunt, blah blah blah. And so I was called in after a couple of the books in the series to say, okay, what do we do about this kind of schism? We've got a JK Rowling, but she's also Robert Galbraith. A lot of people know she's Robert Galbraith, but she's also, what do we do? How do we do that? How do we handle that? And then how do we develop the brand? So I did a piece. So my job was basically to shake up the thinking on that and to come up with ideas around that brief. So incredibly exciting. I met her. She's honestly everything you'd want her to be. Lovely, lovely woman, surrounded by super smart people. Very kind of. My impression of her was really humble, really hardworking, really visionary. As I say, everything you would want J.K. Rowling to be. In my experience, she was, and that's always nice when you kind of meet those people. They turn out to be what you want them to be.
Yeah, exactly.
But equally, I've worked with authors like. people who are dead authors and saying, okay, well, what do we do? What do we do with their back catalogue? How do we reinvent that? Or worked with authors who are writing in one genre and you want to move them to another genre. So a lot of working with publishing houses is about helping reposition authors or reframe perceptions of them in some shape or form. I did some work.
So one of my audience actually asked about this, exactly about this. So I asked a few people, I'm talking to you. I said, what questions would you have for someone like Damien? And they went, oh, I've got a really interesting question for them, because she was actually an author, a friend of mine called Evie. And she said, do you have a kind of methodology or a process for positioning books and authors that kind of consistently works, i.e. some kind of secret sauce? How does that positioning work?
So it's kind of sad, but the fact that publishers are producing so many books, literally, hundreds of them, is that it tends to be quite formulaic in the way that they're approached. So that's one big factor in the mix here. The other factor in the mix is that the author themselves, and this will apply to Evie, your friend, just as much as any other, has spent, 2 years in a shed at the bottom of the garden writing this thing. They've poured their heart, soul, blood, sweat, and tears onto it. They finally come out blinking into the daylight like a mole or badger almost, and reconnect with society. And suddenly their book is taken off on this whirlwind of agents and publishers and bookshops and stuff. And they have a very particular vision themselves of what the book is about, what the cover should look like, what it should be called, how it should be sold, because it's like a child to them. It's a very personal relationship. It's not like in any other product. Then you have a retailer who knows what is selling at the moment and wants, and so the common refrain, be it pejorative or not within the industry, is that the book retailers just want what sold last week. So I want more like that. So what they want is to be able to just say, oh, you like that? Here's one like that. Here's one like it. So they want that, or super simple way of selling it on. So that everybody in the chain has a different kind of agenda or a different framework that they're working to. And I guess the secret is to try to think about the reader. And I know that sounds obvious, but it isn't. So I worked on a series. There's an author called Lee Child, and he writes a series called Jack Reacher. It's all about Jack Reacher. This amazing character, super popular series. And I worked on that very early on when it was doing okay, and they said, look, we want to go further with it. And the publishers had a really interesting idea and campaign around Lee Child, who's the author. And this is quite a common thing where the author clearly, I want to be the person that they look for. I'm Lee Child, or I'm not sure if he would have really said that literally, but authors very often feel they're the center of the piece. And the publisher wants to keep the author happy, and they want to grow the author because they want an author brand. Blah, blah, blah. And I said, look, the real hero here is Jack Reacher. It's not Lee Child.
It's the character.
I'm buying the character. And Lee Child is obviously the creator of the character and my conduit to the character. But what I love is Jack Reacher. And if I love Jack Reacher, then I will love Lee Child.
Yes.
But the thing to get with is Jack Reacher, in the sense, I love Harry Potter, which means I love JK Rowling. That's the way it works. So you've got to kind of flip the model and focus on what is it about the book that the reader will love. Is it the character? Or there's a really interesting piece of research I did where we talked to people about the publishers of their books. And of course, nobody could remember the publisher of any book that they were reading. I mean, any. No one.
I wouldn't have a clue.
No, they've just dropped off the radar in terms of the brand dynamics and the communication hierarchy.
Apart from Charles Dickens and Penguin, I suspect is probably related.
Okay. So, I'm not even sure that's true, actually. So where you get
probably not.
So what you get to is you say, okay, well, what do you love about this book? And I always remember somebody saying to me, I like books with happy endings.
Right.
And I thought, God, I'm like that as well. I like books with happy endings. That's what I want. That's the, and in marketing we often talk about features and benefits. The feature is this car now has side impact protection bars made of Torsten steel and carbon fiber.
Yep.
That's the feature. And that's one way of promoting it. Another way of promoting it is saying, if you're in a crash, your passenger won't die.
Yeah.
Okay? That's a benefit. That's a clear
Exactly.
benefit. You're talking about the same thing, you just focus on, am I focused on the feature or the benefit? With books, we often focus on the features. There's a man in it, he's going to war, he leaves, and we rarely think about the benefit, which is, what are you going to get out of this book? Why are you going to read it?
What's the feeling?
What's the feeling it's going to evoke? And to me, it's often like, it's like drugs. I don't take drugs, but let's say I took cocaine, for example, which I don't. But let's say I took cocaine, okay? I'm not interested in the constituent parts and the chemical compound of cocaine. No. I'm interested in what it makes me feel at the end of it. That's what I'm actually buying into. It's actually the same with a book. You don't really care whether the man meets the woman or the woman meets the man or what you want to do. What you actually want is a feeling. What's that book going to make me feel at the end? Yes. And I think too often we forget about the emotional or intellectual journey that a book takes you on and how that's going to leave you at the end of it. And usually when we talk about a book to somebody else, that's what we talked about. God, it made me cry. Oh, it made me think this. Oh, I thought it really changed the way I thought about that. That's the power. But we don't talk about it. We often get focused on the structural nuances of it or the character. And so it's trying to balance those things is where you get to more interesting places.
I mean, really, you just triggered a thought from 2 weeks ago. I was reading some quotes on books and stuff, and I think it was Maya Angelou said, people won't remember what you tell them. They won't remember what book they read. But what they'll remember is how you made them feel.
Correct. I absolutely endorse that. And we took this to the kind of nth degree with a blurb. A blurb is the description on the back of a book. And it's one of the most powerful kind of marketing tools you've got in the publishing industry. And they're often written by someone very junior in the team.
Right.
And usually the formula is to kind of summarize the book and get the reader to a point where they think, oh my God, I must read on, So a man meets a woman meets a man, and then suddenly a murderer walks into the house. What do they do next? Bum, 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 cliffhanger model. And so if you look at most books, they'll give you a setting, they'll give you a time, a date, and they'll give you the lead characters and some sense of the beginning. So the book was called The Other Hand by Chris Cleave, and the blurb I wrote for that, I can't remember what it was called, but the blurb basically said, we're not going to tell you what happens in this book because it's going to spoil it for you. Right. It's an amazing read. It's super exciting. There's a really scary bit in the middle, and at the end of it, you will desperately want to share it with somebody else. All we ask is that once you've read it, please don't tell them what's in it. Just let them discover it for themselves. So that was, won tons of awards. The book was one of the best-selling debuts by a male new author ever. But the point was, it really tapped into that emotional dynamic in the most kind of direct way. So I think it's like all marketing, it's like all ideas I think we've talked before about system A and system B thinking.
Yeah, we have.
Don't do what everyone else does all the time. Try to just stop for a moment and think fundamentally differently. And often we think we are doing that because, I was quite clever because I changed the order, or I used some different words in it, or I was quite creative in the way I laid it out. But all you're doing is dancing on pinheads within the same idea. Exactly. The hard bit is thinking of a fundamentally different approach.
Brilliant. So, on that note, kind of what are the biggest strategic mistakes made by authors and publishers when they promote books? Just kind of like a few words and an example or something.
I think often the covers are really interesting, the cover and title. So it's one of the primary vehicles you've got for marketing. You pick up a cover, what does it say? Very, very often you see the title is, I don't know, the nun's story, and then
Right.
the cover is a picture of a nun.
Yes.
So you think, okay, the visual isn't adding anything to the communication
No.
mix here.
That's a good
So
point.
that's fine, you know, and you might be able to create a very iconic image of a nun, but actually, if you can have the title saying one thing and the visual saying something else, then you're starting to add some richness to the communication mix.
Yeah.
Then if you add in the blurb, gives a different twist again, then you're getting some richness there. Then if you think about the spine, if it's for sale in a bookshop, that's also a really powerful device when your book isn't on the front shelf, but actually goes on
Yep.
the rows with all the others. Then the opening pages, which is before you get to the novel. What could I do in those pages to say something to influence the reader? The first page, very, very often, if we think a book's interesting, we'll read the first page. What have I really crafted that first page? Have I treated it as a marketing device? What does it say that's going to pull me in? So it's about breaking down each element as much as you can and thinking about it as a communication tool rather than what has the author written.
Exactly. I mean, that's brilliant. In my head now is the emotion bit. I can't get rid of the emotional. It's about the emotional trigger, the benefit, not the feature. It makes perfect sense to me.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, conscious of your time as well, Damien. So, last question from me. So, kind of just in summary, kind of three kind of key messages, if you can, about based on what you've learned from the book publishing world, for businesses of all sizes. What should they be applying to the kind of positioning and promotion of their thought leadership? Which could be a book, it could be an ebook, it could be a thought leadership paper, it could be a blog. What should they learn? We've talked before about how do you take skills and learning from one industry and apply it to another. And I certainly haven't applied anything from the thousands of years of book publishing into the way I do my thought leadership, I'm sure.
So, thought leadership is, a lot of people do, I guess, what we talked about just now, which is they try to sum up an issue or sum up a theme or pull it all together in one place.
Yep.
And maybe add an opinion on top. And again, the kind of communication hierarchy that you want to get to in a thought leadership piece is to excite somebody about where the world is going next on the basis of what is happening now.
Right.
If you're just summarizing what's happening now, you know what? Yeah, that's kind of useful, but it might as well be Wikipedia.
But it's just useful.
It's useful. It's like a Wikipedia entry. Thought leadership is what that means for where we go next. And the trouble with thought leadership in its purest form like that is most people don't want to look like an idiot and get it wrong. So most people play it safe and make some little hints and loads of caveats. Maybe it means this. Maybe it means that. The really great thought leaders have an opinion and set out a vision for it. Recognize that might change, but they bring it to life in such a way that it really feels like you can get your arms around it and do something with it, whether you reject it entirely or embrace it entirely. But that's proper thought leadership, where you're making quantum leaps forward in the way we think about something rather than summing up what we kind of already know.
Absolutely. I mean, it reminds me of the data, information, knowledge, insight, wisdom. That model was built, 50 odd years ago or more.
Correct. And yet
that wisdom piece is what you're aiming for.
Yes.
We still ignore it. We still ignore it.
We still do. So that's the first thing for me, I think, is be bold and don't think that just because you've written lots of words, you've actually communicated very much.
Yeah.
I think the second thing is think about your audience rather than the subject. So what a lot of people do with a thought leadership piece is they start from the point of, right, this is the theme I'm going to talk about. Let me pull it all together and then sum it up, as opposed to who's my audience for this thought leadership piece? why is that my audience, and what do I want them to think or do as a result of reading this?
Yeah.
So really start there before you start your writing. Really get your head around, am I trying to shock them? Am I trying to reassure them? Am I trying to make them think differently? Am I, whatever that might be, do I want them to invest some money? Do I want them to stop doing something? Blah, blah, blah. What is it you're trying to do to them? Not what am I trying to say about this thing, this subject.
Yeah.
Start over there. So that, again, kind of obvious. We all ignore it. We all forget about, we just don't do it. And it's a simple error that is often made with thought leadership pieces.
Yeah.
And then
brilliant.
I think the final piece is do it with some flair and personality. Do it in a way that engages and excites the audience. And again, sounds obvious, but the drier you make it, the more hard work you make it. And actually, this is about thought leadership. This is about vision and enthusiasm,
inspiration.
Inspiration. It should be anthemic. It should be exciting. It should be scary, not dry and dull. So to play with it and be bold with it, because that's how you can communicate ideas that people actually want to engage with.
Yeah. I mean, amazing, brilliant kind of three messages. It just reminded me of when I'm not a big fan of Steve Jobs. However, you cannot deny what Apple did to the world. Oh. And to build advocates that Apple have built who will not buy anything else apart from Apple products because it has emotion in it. The products have feeling in them and they connect with their audience in a very meaningful way is amazing.
Yeah, the days of USPs are long gone. And if you have a USP, it'll be copied before you even know it. So you can't build businesses now on USPs. I just don't believe it's possible anymore. What you can build businesses on is attitude, vision, mission, value systems. And
Purpose.
I think exactly. And I think in this, and traditionally that mission or purpose has been quite commercial. And I think we're shifting to an age where they're becoming much more value driven. I think it's fascinating. For example, John Lewis this week have announced they're going to be building homes for people. So this is a retail store that is now building houses for people who are less well off. So that's a massive statement about them as a brand and their belief system and their value system. And those are the kind of value statements, and I don't mean value as in monetary value, I mean values. Those are the things that over the next 10, 20 years are going to define the winners in terms of the brand space. And as importantly, that kind of millennial and particularly the Gen Z communities and generations, that is what they are buying into. That is more important to them than almost anything else. So I think it's great for society and for the planet.
I agree.
Business is moving that direction. But we should all be cognizant of that now and thinking about it and acting on it.
I was looking at the Oatly IPO recently because I think they did an IPO, I think, in May. And that had a massive uplift beyond where they expected in terms of share price. Why? Because people buy into Oatly. It's a purpose-driven brand. Yeah. It's trying to do some good in the world.
Yeah.
And it happens to be very valuable.
Exactly. And I think that's what's lovely is those things don't need to be in opposition with each other. You can do good to the world and you can make money. And I think more and more ESG brands, more and more those two value systems are going to come together, which I think is very exciting.
Absolutely. Damien, thank you. Again, amazing episode. And thank you ever so much for being a guest. So thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Take care.